A man with salt and pepper hair, an old baseball cap covering half his face, stood silently behind a shelf stocked with cereal boxes and canned soups. In his hand was a carton of milk he had just neatly placed back in the refrigerator. No one paid him any mind. No one knew that this was Miles Bennett, the founder and CEO of the convenience store chain Bennett's Mart, with over 400 locations across America. But this morning, he wasn't the CEO. He was Matt, a new employee in training. And then he heard it. "Don't worry, sir. You don't have to pay today." A quiet sentence, almost swallowed by the noisy hum of the barcode scanner and the sound of the automatic glass doors opening and closing. But to him, it detonated like a silent bomb, shaking the very foundations of what he believed about the business he had built. He froze. His heart pounded. A question flashed through his mind. Why would he do that? The person who had just spoken was a young man in his 20s, tall and slender, with light brown, slightly curly hair and bright eyes. On his shirt was a simple name tag, Eli. He had just gently bagged the items for an old man, then pulled out his personal wallet, took out a $5 bill, and put it in the cash register drawer. No one ordered him to. No one was watching, and no one knew it was happening except for the man behind the shelf, the man who had spent his entire career talking about human values in board meetings, but had never witnessed anything as real as this. The old man, he would later learn his name was Mr. Harlan, could only look at Eli with a worried expression. "Eli, you can't keep doing this." Eli gave a small smile, gently touched the man's shoulder, and then turned to serve the next customer. Not a word of self-praise, not a single glance seeking recognition. Miles stood there, a lump in his throat, as if he had just been dealt a wake-up call in the middle of an ordinary day by an unknown employee. The question was no longer, why did he do it, but rather, how could a young man with no power, no high compensation, choose to be kind so consistently, so quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, in over 20 years as a leader? Miles thought he understood his company. He knew every report, every KPI chart by heart. But in that moment, he suddenly realized no number could ever measure Eli's heart, and no strategy meeting could ever give him the answer as to why an employee like Eli never appeared in any performance report. Miles said nothing that day. He just stood silently, took a step back, and made a decision. He would stay, not to investigate wrongdoing, but to observe something deeper. He didn't know that this decision would not only change how he ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but would also touch millions of hearts, the seemingly anonymous people who quietly preserve the most beautiful thing left in this world, kindness. Miles began his first shift in a slightly faded blue uniform, his baseball cap pulled low and a pair of old sneakers he had intentionally scuffed up. On the plastic name tag pinned to his chest, Matt, trainee. No one recognized him. No one asked any questions. And that was exactly what he wanted. Store number 7, located in a quiet residential area in Asheville, was not the largest branch, nor was it the top-selling location in the Bennett's Mart system. But, according to an internal map, This store had an unusually high customer experience rating, a figure that had made him curious, so curious that he decided to step inside himself from the very first few minutes. Eli caught his attention, not because Eli was overly conspicuous, but precisely because of the lack of effort in his every action. When a customer walked in, he would look up from the counter and smile gently. "Hello, did you walk here today? Or did you get a ride?" It wasn't a scripted greeting. It was genuine familiarity, a kind of unforced concern. Eli wasn't the type of employee who was overly effusive, nor was he acting. Every thank you he said had a different nuance. To the elderly, gentle and affectionate. To the school kids, playful and cheerful. To a single mother, careful and empathetic. Miles watched Eli from a distance, but he could clearly see what the KPI charts could never show. Eli wasn't doing it to get a good review. He was doing it because he felt it was the right thing to do. For the first hour, Miles tried to do his job properly, stocking the ice cream freezer, picking up a few dropped items, helping a customer find the juice aisle, and putting new price labels on the snack cakes. But his eyes kept drifting toward the checkout counter, where Eli was working non-stop and not once letting a customer leave without something extra: a smile, a well-wish, a thoughtful question. Around 9:40 a.m., something happened that left Miles stunned. An old man in a brown baseball cap and an old khaki jacket walked up. His trembling hands placed a bottle of milk, a sandwich, and a small box of painkillers on the counter. Eli glanced at the total, then pulled out his personal wallet. Without a moment's hesitation, without waiting for the old man to say a word, "I've got this one. It's too hot out today. You should go home and get some rest." "But, Eli, you can't keep doing this," the old man whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Eli just smiled, gave a slight wink, and continued ringing up the next customer. The whole thing took barely 20 seconds, but for Miles, it was a moment that completely redrew the emotional map in his heart. He was standing behind the cereal aisle, still holding a box of oatmeal, but his entire body felt frozen. He had spoken about social responsibility to investors. He had signed off on CSR budgets, hundreds of pages long, but he had never seen humanity manifest itself so simply, so genuinely. There were no newspapers, no cameras, just one person doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. Miles didn't approach, didn't greet him, didn't intervene. He just took a step back, hiding himself among the aisles, and decided, today, I will not be the CEO. I will be an observer, someone learning how to see people again. He asked himself, was this the first time Eli did this, or did I just get lucky and witness one part of an entire chain of silent actions? That question haunted him for the rest of his first day. After witnessing Eli pull out his personal wallet to help Mr. Harlan, Miles no longer had any doubt. This kid wasn't a fortunate coincidence. He was something that should have been recognized a long time ago. For the rest of his shift, Miles began to observe with a focus that surprised even himself. He still pulled pallets of goods, still changed price labels, still stocked shelves like a proper employee. But his gaze never for a moment left the checkout counter where Eli stood. And what he saw was a series of breathtakingly beautiful acts that would certainly never appear in any performance report he had ever read. Eli remembered every customer's name without looking at a receipt. An old woman named Claire was looking for her usual pain reliever before she could even ask. Eli had already presented the right kind, the one with the yellow label. This one is an extra 15% off today. Why don't you get 2 to have on hand? Eli said with a smile, his hands still skillfully scanning products. An old man named Bob walked in, mumbling, "I wonder if they have any of those sodas with the promotional sticker today." Before he could finish his sentence, Eli called out from the counter, "We do, sir. I put some right in the first cooler on the left for you, even with a schoolgirl in her uniform." Eli not only asked about her studies but also gently reminded her, "The muffins are all one price today. Grab an extra one for this afternoon." Miles felt like he was watching a silent symphony where each of Eli's gestures was a gentle, empathetic, and honest note. No performance, no need for a spotlight. Not long after, another situation unfolded that almost made Miles drop the box he was carrying. Around 11 a.m., a young mother holding a child of about 3, her face gaunt and her eyes filled with anxiety. On the conveyor belt was only a bag of bread, a small bottle of milk, and a cheap bottle of juice. Total $6.89. The woman fumbled in her wallet, counting out every last cent. The child started to fuss, then buried its head in its mother's shoulder. From a distance, Miles's heart tightened as he saw the mother's trembling hand about to put the bottle of juice back. But Eli managed to do something that no security camera would ever record. He turned away for a split second, then silently pulled a $5 bill from his front pocket and slipped it straight into the cash register drawer. "You're all set. You had some loyalty points from last time. I just applied them." No one knew if any loyalty points actually existed. But the mother smiled the first smile she had shown in the 5 minutes she had been at the counter. Miles, however, stood frozen. This wasn't customer service. This was unconditional kindness. No KPI system at Bennett's Mart required employees to remember customer preferences or provide financial assistance from their own pockets. No policy rewarded quiet empathy, and certainly no training course taught Eli how to listen to the weariness in someone else's eyes. Miles knew this all too well, because he was the one who signed off on all those procedures. But now he felt like he had never understood anything at all. Eli wasn't doing it to be recognized. He didn't care who was watching. He simply chose to do the right thing every time, with every customer, every day. In that moment, Miles recalled the hundreds of leadership meetings where he had spoken eloquently about a people-centric culture. And he saw himself laid bare, not by a news article or a critique, but by a young employee who was doing the very things he had always preached but had never truly lived. And he asked himself, if I hadn't happened to come here today, when would these things have ever been seen that afternoon? When the clock struck 12, most of the employees had either finished their shifts or were having lunch just outside the store. Inside, the small break room behind the counter was dimly lit by an old fluorescent light, as faint as the peeling paint on the walls. Miles walked in, holding a plastic cup of coffee he had just made from the machine. He hadn't planned to say anything, but Eli was also sitting there alone. He was leaning against the wall, holding a paper box with a sandwich, his eyes focused on his phone screen. He wasn't playing a game or scrolling through social media. He was texting short, slow, somewhat tense messages. Miles walked over, feigning casualness. "It was really busy this morning." "Huh?" Eli looked up and offered a faint smile, the same familiar smile Miles had seen many times at the checkout counter. "Yeah, it's like this every day, but I'm used to it." There was no suspicion, no arrogance, just a young man on his lunch break. Miles nodded, took a sip of coffee, then turned and lowered his voice, as if the question had just popped into his head. "This morning, I saw you help an old man, khaki jacket." His hands were a little shaky. "Do you know him?" Eli paused for a moment. He didn't avoid the question. He was just silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "Mr. Harlan. He lives in the apartment at the end of the street. His wife passed away 2 years ago, and now he lives alone. He's on Social Security, but sometimes he's still short a few dollars, especially at the end of the month." Miles looked at Eli, trying to hide his emotions behind a neutral gaze. "You help him." That often Eli looked him straight in the eye. No hesitation, no hiding. But his answer made Miles's throat catch. "Not really often. It's just when I see someone is short and I have a little extra, then why not help?" A simple sentence. But behind it, Miles heard a whole layer of values that he thought only existed in the company's mission statement documents. A few dollars to me isn't much, but to him, it could be his breakfast, and he doesn't ask. It's just that when you see someone is hungry, is struggling, and you pretend not to see, I feel like you lose a part of yourself too. Miles said nothing. He was the one who had stood before thousands of employees, lecturing on community responsibility, emotional service, and customer respect. But now, in this musty break room, he was being retaught all of those things by a young man who had never studied management, never read a business book, and had never been honored on any wall of fame. A minute of silence passed. Eli continued to eat his sandwich. Miles turned away as if to hide the fact that his eyes were starting to well up. Then Eli asked quietly, "What was your name again?" "I forgot." Miles was momentarily startled. "Matt," he replied, as if by reflex. "Matt, stockroom guy. It's my first day." Eli nodded, without a hint of suspicion. "Welcome to the team." That simple phrase made Miles smile faintly. But inside him, something was shifting, something deep and simmering. For the past 20 years, I've been searching for the formula to build a corporate culture, and I never knew that sometimes culture starts with one person like Eli, quiet, without fanfare, but so genuine it forces others to look at themselves. The next morning, Miles arrived at the store very early. The sky was still hazy with mist, the pavement damp and cold, and the lights inside Bennett's Mart branch number 7 glowed yellow like a lonely lantern on the empty street. Eli hadn't arrived yet, but in the stockroom area, a woman with salt and pepper hair was already pushing heavy boxes off a pallet truck. Her posture was sturdy, her grey jacket faded, the soles of her soft-soled shoes worn down at the heels. The name on her tag, Carla. Miles recognized her as the person who often appeared on the night shift log, 12 years of service. Almost never missed a shift. He walked over, helped her by lifting a box onto a shelf, and then started a conversation as if he were just a curious new employee. Eli is really amazing, isn't he? He's fast at everything, and he remembers the customers too. Carla glanced up at him, then gave a weary smile, the kind of smile from someone who is used to hardship but still holds on to their kindness. He's a good kid, cares about people, but life hasn't been kind to him. Miles stopped what he was doing. Her words pierced his heart like a small but very sharp thorn. Carla placed a carton of milk on the rack and slowly began to tell his story as if these words had been waiting to spill out for a long time, just needing someone willing to listen. He's very smart, even got a local scholarship in high school. But then his father died suddenly in a construction accident. A year later, his mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. He gave up everything, his studies, his friends, his youth, to work all sorts of jobs to support his mother and little sister. No complaints, never asked anyone for help. For years now, he's been working from 7 in the morning until late at night, then goes home to cook and help his sister with her homework. Miles asked nothing. He just stood there, listening silently. Every word seemed to seep into his blood. Carla continued, her voice lower. I've worked here for 12 years. I've met all kinds of people. Some are hard-working, some are good at sales, some are smooth talkers. But Eli is the only one I've seen who is both incredibly resilient and gentle. He gives so much, but no one ever asks him, "Are you okay?" Carla's hand trembled slightly as she pushed a box of pasta up high. Miles stepped in to help her. "But he still seems so cheerful. He still helps people," he said, as if asking himself, how does he hold on to his kindness like that? Carla smiled, but this time it was a bitter smile, because he doesn't think of kindness as a behavior. To him, being kind is natural, like breathing. He doesn't calculate it. He just can't bring himself to turn his back when he sees someone suffering more than he is. Miles listened, his chest tightening. "Do you think the company knows about Eli's situation?" he asked. Carla gave a faint smile and shook her head. "The company knows numbers. It knows who's late, who's a good seller. But nobody knows who is sacrificing what. That. Only the people in the stockroom, on the night shift, get to see." For the first time in years, Miles felt that he, the man who drew up the put people first philosophy on glossy presentation slides, was the one lagging behind in truly seeing people. Carla's words kept replaying in his mind. He just keeps giving, and no one is there to protect him. A cold chill ran down Miles's spine. because he knew she wasn't wrong. Eli was doing the right thing, living with a huge heart, but if this system didn't support him, then at some point that kindness would be depleted. Not because Eli would change, but because the environment would be unworthy of his continued faith. And for the first time, Miles felt angry, but not at anyone else, at himself. How did I let this happen under my own name, under my own philosophy? He knew he could no longer stand on the sidelines. On the morning of the third day, Miles Bennett arrived at store number 7 earlier than ever. It was no longer Matt, the new guy, in his mind today. It was a decision that could not be delayed. He didn't come to observe anymore. He came to bear witness. He hadn't slept all night. Carla's story. Eli's eyes, his instinctual kindness, it all swirled around him like sharp needles, converging into an unavoidable truth. If he, the founder of this system, didn't speak up for people like Eli, then everything he had ever believed in was just empty theory. When the shift ended at the end of the day, Miles walked to the manager's office and requested that all employees be summoned to the break room. No one knew what was happening. There was no announcement from headquarters, no internal email. Everyone thought it was just an emergency meeting due to an operational issue. Eli thought so too. He stood in the corner of the room, still chatting cheerfully with a new employee, a can of soda in his hand, his back leaning against the old mini-fridge. He had no idea that, in just a few minutes, his life was about to turn a completely new page. The break room was packed. The air was heavy with silence. Miles walked in. He was still wearing the dark jacket, still wearing the old baseball cap, but this time he walked to the center of the room, took off his cap, pulled down his hood, and held his head high. He was no longer Matt. He was Miles Bennett, the founder and CEO of the entire Bennett's Mart system. No one spoke. A few jaws dropped. A few people stepped back, but all eyes turned in unison to a single point: Eli. He stood, frozen, stunned, as if the rug had just been pulled out from under his feet. Miles looked around, then took a deep breath. His voice was deep, clear, and steady. I have been here for 3 days, under a fake name, not to find fault, not to punish anyone, but to find something that the reports could never show me. He paused, turning toward Eli. By now, Eli was no longer smiling. His face was tense, his hands squeezing the soda can so tightly it was starting to crumple. Miles continued, I saw someone with no title, no spotlight, who is changing this entire system with kindness that needs no recognition. Eli, the room was dead silent. I saw you pay for Mr. Harlan with your own money. I saw you remember every customer, every item they needed. I saw you help a young mother get an extra bottle of juice for her child. No one asked you to do that. You had no idea anyone was watching. And because of that, what you did was real. Eli's eyes began to glisten. He bit his lip, but he didn't speak. Miles turned to everyone and said loudly, I thought I understood the philosophy I wrote. Serve with heart, put people first. But Eli, you are the one who truly lives it when no one is watching, when there is no reward, when no one is clapping. Then he looked directly at Eli. And for that, today I am announcing 3 things. The air seemed to freeze. First, the entire staff of store number 7 will receive a 1-month salary bonus because you have preserved the true soul of this system. Second, Eli, you are officially promoted to shift manager. You will have a better salary, more flexible hours, and I personally will sponsor your sister's entire college tuition. A sharp gasp was heard from the back of the room, followed by applause. Scattered at first, then spreading like a wave. One employee started to cry. Another whispered. Finally, someone sees him. Miles raised his hand. The room fell silent again. Third, he said slowly, as of today, I am establishing the Eli Fund, an internal fund to support employees who are silently struggling with hardships. Just as Eli has helped his customers, from now on, no one has to struggle alone anymore. Eli stood still. His hands hung limply at his sides. His eyes were red, but he still didn't speak. Then, after a moment, he stepped forward, his voice hoarse but clear. I didn't do those things to be recognized. I just thought, if I see someone is having a bad day and I can make it a little less bad, then why not do it? Miles nodded. His own eyes were red. And because you expected nothing in return, you deserve everything. That evening, as store number 7 turned off its lights and everyone went home with a joy as if they had just witnessed a real miracle, Miles didn't go back to headquarters. He stood in front of the store's outer wall, his hand touching the Bennett's Mart sign under the faint yellow light. A lump in his throat. In nearly 2 decades of running this system, not once had he seen his core values come to life as vividly as they had today. Not on a report, but in Eli's tear-filled eyes, in the echoing applause in that small, old room. The next morning, the Eli Fund was officially established, but with no grand ceremony, no media, no PR, just a short internal email written by Miles himself. From today on, if you are struggling but don't want to complain, if you see a colleague who needs help but you don't know how, remember, you are not alone. The Eli Fund has no complicated procedures. You don't need to go through HR. A simple nomination from a coworker is enough. He never expected that. Just 48 hours later, his CEO inbox, which usually only received financial documents and partnership proposals, would be flooded with messages from stores all across the country. But they weren't complaints. They weren't demands for a raise. They were stories. An employee in Kansas told of the time she paid for gas for an old man who was lost. A young employee in Colorado confessed that he had been bringing sandwiches to a homeless person sitting outside the store for 3 months and had never told anyone. A manager in Florida shared that he had taken a day off without pay to take a stockroom worker to the doctor because he didn't have insurance. No one shared to show off. It was as if they were just waiting for someone to give them permission for their kindness to be acknowledged. Miles read each message in silence. Inside him, something was being rearranged. He realized what was keeping this company alive wasn't the system, it was the small, continuous, nameless, unspotlighted actions. And then, like an unforeseen chain reaction, a wave of quiet kindness began to spread. A store in Ohio used the Eli Fund to support a new mother whose child had complications. A branch in Arizona proposed buying a bicycle for the night shift worker who had been walking 7 miles each way to work for 6 months. A branch in Vermont organized a weekend support group where people living alone could have lunch with their colleagues. No one was directing it. There were no KPIs. No slogans were painted on the walls. There were only people seeing each other. Miles had once been honored as an inspirational CEO in a major business magazine, but he had never truly felt like a leader until he stopped giving orders and started listening. The Eli Fund wasn't about celebrating one person. It was about acknowledging, in every system, there are Elis, quiet, kind, but never seen. And now, the entire system was being led by something that had never been put into a strategy. Kindness could become a sustainable operational force. There were no motivational posters, no system-wide emails urging, "Be like Eli." No competition programs were launched from headquarters. But a quiet wave had begun to spread throughout Bennett's Mart stores nationwide. The change wasn't happening in the boardroom. It was happening in the cramped, dusty spaces where people still had real interactions with each other every day. At branch number 22 in Oregon, a cashier started remembering the names of elderly customers and setting aside the right kind of milk she liked. At a store in South Carolina, a new young employee organized a surprise birthday party for the night security guard who was always on duty alone and whom no one had ever asked about. And in New Mexico, a group of employees pooled their own money to buy a new backpack for a co-worker who had been walking to work with a plastic bag. No one made them do it. There were no rewards hanging at the end of the aisle, but they did it, simply because now, in their hearts, they had a name, a symbol, a person who reminded them that kindness was real. They called it the Eli Spirit. Miles knew this couldn't be measured by data, but he didn't need the numbers. He saw the change clearly in the smallest things, a gradual decrease in resignation letters, shifts that were no longer as stressful, employees sharing shifts more easily, more flexibly, and most importantly, the smiles had returned no longer forced as before. He used to talk about a people-first culture at conferences, but now he understood deeply that culture doesn't lie in what is declared. It lives in what is repeated without needing to be reminded. Eli remained the same. He didn't accept the role of an inspirational figure. He didn't post long articles or take pictures with a star on his employee badge. He just came in a little earlier, checked the shelves before his shift, and asked each colleague, "How are you doing today?" A small gesture, but for someone who had just gone through a tough week or a new employee who still felt lost, that question carried more weight than a commendation email. Eli didn't try to spread values. He just lived his truth. And it was this consistency that made him a small light that brightened anyone who came near without them even realizing it. A new employee who was once grumpy about having to smile at customers came back after a week and said quietly to Eli during a break, "At first, I thought you were fake, but now I get it. You're not trying to smile, you're just being real, and I feel really small-minded." Eli didn't respond. He just gently patted the person's shoulder and said, "It's okay. Everyone gets tired." That story wasn't recorded anywhere. But Carla, the stockroom employee, retold it at a regional meeting. And from then on, the phrase, "It's okay. Everyone gets tired," became a running joke among many colleagues, but also a way they reminded themselves to live a little lighter, a little more genuinely, and with more care. Miles no longer needed canned speeches in leadership meetings. He just told stories. He told stories about Eli, about an employee who had made him a seasoned CEO relearn how to see people. And those who listened, the regional directors, the area managers, they were silent, not because they lacked questions, but because they were looking in the mirror. No one forced them to change, but after listening, no one was insensitive enough not to change. Ever since the day he was unmasked, Eli was no longer the anonymous young man behind the checkout counter. He was mentioned in regional meetings. He was included in onboarding materials for new employees as a prime example of leadership without a title. A short article on the company's internal blog titled "Meet Eli" was shared over 200,000 times in just 3 days. A local newspaper called Eli the Cashier, who made the entire retail industry look again. A Sunday morning television show aired a 4-minute segment about him. People from other towns started coming to the store just to meet Eli, take pictures, and say thank you. And Eli, he still arrived early as always, still checked the merchandise, helped new hires remember product barcodes, still asked his colleagues if they slept well, and still avoided talking about himself. His humility wasn't a way to maintain an image. It was his nature. He wasn't playing the role of an inspirational figure. He was just living as he had always lived, even before anyone knew his name. But it wasn't without its challenges. Because when you are praised for your kindness, there will always be people who test to see if that kindness is real. Some colleagues were skeptical. Some tried to see what Eli would do if he were insulted. Some customers were unreasonably grumpy just to test whether he was genuinely kind or just putting on an act. Eli knew it, but he didn't retaliate. He would just gently take a step back, bow his head, and say, "I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable. I hope the rest of your day is better." No bitterness, no toughness to prove anything. Every time he was tested, he just chose to side with peace. Miles from a distance witnessed it all, and he understood kindness, when praised, will be tested. But if it's real, it doesn't need defending. There were times when Eli was tired, on busy days, when they were short-staffed, when his shift was extended. There were times he just wanted to be alone, not to be bothered by anyone. But he didn't lose himself. He just quietly took a deeper breath. And it was in those moments that the transformation happened, not on the outside, but inside other people. A young employee who had been very withdrawn and annoyed with everything began to change after a few weeks of working with Eli. One evening after his shift, the young man came up and said quietly, "You don't have to be so nice. I feel tired for you, but I also feel lighter working with you." Eli didn't respond with theory. He just smiled, nodded, and said, "Thank you for saying that. I have bad days too. But if we can be the reason someone else feels a little lighter, It's worth it. The change in the team didn't start with a process. It didn't start with a policy. It started with how one person lived consistently in all circumstances. Eli didn't need to force anyone to follow him, but anyone who was around him began to adjust themselves. A group of young employees started a 10 minutes of kindness group every weekend where people shared a good deed they did or received. No rewards, just listening. One day, Miles returned to store number 7, this time not in disguise, not hidden. He stood outside the door, quietly looking inside. Eli was sitting next to a new employee, a scrawny 18-year-old boy, clearly still awkward. Eli wasn't talking about procedures. He just placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and asked, "Are you doing okay? Is there anything that's making you feel out of place?" And then he truly listened, not looking at his watch, not rushing to answer, just listening as if that answer was the most important thing in the world. And in that moment, Miles suddenly realized, people taught me that leadership is about making decisions, but no one ever taught me that. Knowing how to listen is also a leadership skill, and Eli is living that every day without needing a title. In just 3 months after Miles Bennett's surprise announcement, Eli was no longer a cashier at branch number 7. He became a living symbol. Other branches called for his advice. Employees from distant states asked to come train on a shift with Eli. A public university invited Eli to speak about informal, positive influence in the workplace. A sociology student even wrote his graduation thesis with the title, "Leadership Without a Title: The Case of Eli Turner." And the customers, many came to the store not to buy anything, but to meet the good person they had read about in the newspaper. Some would quietly wait in line just to say, "Thank you for what you've done, not just in the store, but for my faith in people." Eli would smile, shake their hand, and still ask his old question, "Are you doing okay today?" But when the corporate office sent an official offer, "We would like to appoint Eli as the area manager, double the salary, full title, company car," Eli replied immediately without much thought, "I'm grateful, but I must decline." Miles called him personally Eli. "You could change the whole system from a higher position. You would have a bigger voice." Eli was silent for a moment, then replied slowly, "But if I leave this place, I won't be myself anymore." Miles's throat tightened, not out of sadness, but because he understood all too well that this answer wasn't humility. It was absolute authenticity. "I'm not good at managing. I don't want to sit in an office, signing papers. I want to greet customers, look into their eyes, and recognize who's having a bad day so I can do something. Small, but real." There was no grand speech, but in a national leadership meeting, Miles opened with that very quote from Eli, and the entire room fell silent. He said, "Success isn't just about moving up. It's about being in the right place to let your kindness shine." From then on, the philosophy, "You don't have to move up to make a difference," became a small line of text at the bottom of the new internal training materials as a reminder that staying put can also be a courageous choice. Eli continued to live just as he had from day one. He still ran the internal chat group to share happy stories from the shifts. He still hand-wrote thank you cards after the busy holiday season. He still proactively wrapped a small birthday gift for a janitor who had just lost her husband, just so she wouldn't feel forgotten. No budget, no request from management, just a heart that still had room for others. And then one day, Eli said something that Miles would never forget, not in a meeting, not on a stage, but during a time the two were sitting at a coffee counter. "I don't want to be a role model. I just want to be the reason someone believes that you can be kind without losing out." And it was true. Eli, by choosing not to go higher, but to go deeper, had become a source of moral support for thousands of employees across the country. Not through speeches, not through slogans, but through the strangely consistent alignment between what he believed and how he lived. On a clear spring afternoon, Miles Bennett returned to store number 7 this time without a baseball cap, without a disguise, not as a CEO, but as a father. He brought his 14-year-old son with him, a boy who was seeing his father at work for the first time, not in a suit, but among cramped shelves, carrying milk cartons, and wiping down the checkout counter. The boy looked around timidly and whispered, "Dad, is this the place where that Eli guy works?" Miles nodded, then gestured for his son to sit at a table by the window. From that spot, they could see Eli kneeling down to pick up the contents of an old man's torn bag, not saying much, just silently gathering the items into a new bag, then helping the man stand up with both hands as if he were helping up something incredibly precious. The boy whispered, "He's really nice, Dad." Miles turned away, trying to hide a smile and also a tear that had just fallen at the corner of his eye. Just those 4 words from his son's mouth. "He's really nice" made him feel that he wasn't just changing how he ran a company, but that he was reseeding the definition of human value for the next generation. Not long after, a short video of Eli was reshared from the internal blog onto social media, and no one expected it would spread with the speed of something society was craving. Not because of professional editing, no epic background music. Just one clip. Eli was quietly pouring water into a cup for an elderly customer while still smiling and checking on another person waiting. No dialogue, no narration. But the comments below were longer than the clip itself. A mother wrote, "My 12-year-old son watched this, then went and tidied up all the shoes by the front door and said, 'I want to be like him.'" A man living alone said, "It's been a long time since I cried just because of an act of kindness that asked for nothing in return." A high school student wrote, "At first I thought he was an actor, but it turns out there are really people like that." And then, local schools started using Eli's story as an example in their civics programs. A leadership skills training center invited Eli to speak. He declined, but after Miles said, "They don't need a lecture, they just need to hear how you live," he nodded. During his first talk, when someone asked, "How do you hold on to kindness when you're tired, when you're poor, when no one is thanking you?" Eli didn't offer a model. He didn't speak in philosophies. He just answered very softly, Every time I feel tired, I think about the people who helped me without asking for anything. A middle school teacher who bought me new shoes. A neighbor who brought over hot bread just because she saw our house was dark all week. If they did it for me, then now it's my turn to do it for others. In the room at that moment, there were people who, for the first time, dared to admit that they had been cold, had pretended not to see others' pain just because they were afraid of getting hurt, afraid of being seen as weak. Eli didn't force anyone to change, but through his simplicity and consistency, he seemed to give everyone permission to be real again. It was also thanks to Eli that Miles received the most surprising thing in his leadership career. A rival company, one they had never collaborated with, proactively sent an invitation for a cultural exchange, not to learn how to increase sales, but to ask, how do you retain your employees for so long and why? Are they still smiling genuinely after an 8-hour shift? And for the first time, Miles answered without mentioning any strategy. Because in that place, there is someone who never stopped believing that kindness is the right choice, even when no one is watching. And it seemed the whole world was starting to watch. 1 year after Miles Bennett first stepped into store number 7 as Matt, Bennett's mart had changed a lot. The employee turnover rate had dropped sharply. Customer satisfaction levels had noticeably increased. But the thing that made Miles proudest wasn't in the statistics. It was when he heard employees at another branch whisper to each other, "Let's try to be a little more like Eli today. No pressure, no slogans. Just a gentle reminder of a way of living that anyone could achieve." Eli was still the same, still arrived early, still poured water for elderly customers, still hand-wrote birthday wishes for colleagues without anyone asking, still asked new hires, "Are you doing okay?" But this time he was no longer standing alone. Someone in line behind him would continue the conversation. A new colleague would proactively share their lunch. A customer brought in a box of pastries, leaving a note. "Thank you for showing me that kindness still exists." Eli didn't like being praised. He once said, "I only do small things, so small that sometimes I think no one notices." But it was those small things, repeated with persistence, that had become a warm flame for a system that had once operated coldly. Miles used to think his role was to make decisions, expand the market, increase profit margins. But after a year of quietly observing the Eli effect, he had learned the biggest lesson of his life, and he spoke about it at a national leadership conference where he was invited as the honorary speaker. He didn't talk about growth. He didn't talk about supply chain strategy. He just told the story of an employee who once pulled out his wallet to pay $5 for a poor old man. And he ended his speech with this, "I used to think the role of a leader was to lead the way. Now I understand that role is to create a space for others to shine by being their true selves. No titles needed, no applause needed, just someone brave enough to be kind when no one is demanding it." The room stood and applauded, not for a flashy speech, but because they realized every one of them had once been an Eli, but may have forgotten, and perhaps they were ready to find that again. One autumn afternoon, at store number 7, a boy of about 10 years old timidly approached the checkout counter with his mother. After Eli handed back the change, the boy looked up and asked, his voice small but clear, "Are you the Mr. Eli from the video?" Eli smiled gently. That's probably me. The boy held his mother's hand tightly, then whispered, I want to be like you. I want to do good things when I grow up. Eli bent down, placed a light hand on the boy's shoulder, and replied in his familiar, deep but gentle voice, You don't have to wait until you grow up. You can start today. Don't wait until you have a title to do the right thing. Don't think that a small act has no meaning, because sometimes all it takes is one person to see, one person not to turn away, to change a whole small world. And if you're wondering, can I be that person? The answer is yes. You always can. Just start with one act of kindness today.